BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Black Box Nerd 88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And I would like to welcome everybody to today's discussion. We're going to be talking about the serial killer Robert Christian Hansen from Anchorage, Alaska, also known as the Butcher Baker. And Robert Christian Hansen wasn't only a serial killer, he will also go on to become an alternative Zodiac killer suspect. And I have to thank YouTube user Kelly Gable for sharing a lot of material about that with me. In 2019, I would say in the spring, almost close to the early summer, we did 2 uploads on this channel talking about Robert Christian Hansen and the Zodiac killer connections. And because we have mentioned some of that material on the channel before, I would like to start with some introductory comments, and then we will look more at some of the new developments that Kelly Gable has shared with me that will be happening in the later part of the episode. But I would first like to say that Robert Hansen was a serial killer that was born on February 15th, 1939, and he went on to pass away on August 21st of 2014, August 21st, 2014, at the age of 75. He didn't always live in Alaska because he started out in the Midwest in Iowa. He was born in Esterville, Iowa, but then he would move to Pocahontas, Iowa for a time being. Now, the things that I notice about Robert Christian Hansen immediately is that they first describe that he had a harsh experience with his father growing up. The relationship between parent and child seems overwhelming, and it seems like that he had perhaps a bad relationship with both parents if he's going to go on to become a serial killer. That is something that is very common and very frequent. But they definitely want to highlight some of these things about how he had a harsh experience with his father, but his father, a Danish immigrant, was also a baker, and that's why Robert Christian Hansen would go on to open his own bakery in Anchorage, Alaska, the sort of thing about becoming the thing that you are dreading. But with Robert Christian Hansen, a big detail that I begin to notice is that they often want to talk about the feelings and experiences that he had as a teenager. First, he developed very severe acne, which even left him with scars into his adulthood. And the second thing is he developed a stutter that people would mock him for and make fun of him for. And we were talking about some things with psychological education on the most recent AMA, and you guys can always drop your questions for the next Ask Me Anything in the comment section below. And I was discussing this stuff with somebody recently, and they're talking to me about their findings as an academic in regards to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which was some stuff that I really had forgotten. I read that stuff so long ago, I didn't even really remember the gist of it, but the person shared the idea with me that one of the most traumatic experiences that somebody can have is alienation. And as a teenager, he definitely felt alienated from women, by women. People were rejecting him, people were shunning him. People were making fun of him because of his chronic acne, because of his stutter, or just the entire concept of being undesirable. And some additional things that we can say about psychology and mental awareness education is a point that I really wanted to emphasize in 2019 was something that I felt was heavily neglected from the whole concept of psychological education was mental awareness and its regards to feelings of rejection. Feeling rejected from society should be treated as its own mental awareness issue. Something such as, like when people are feeling angry or people are feeling sad, people are feeling rejected. I mean, yes, people want to talk about having an anger problem. Yes, people want to talk about things like clinical depression, but feeling rejected from society should be viewed as its own mental awareness issue, and that can be incorporated into our school system, education, curriculum, and all of those things. To help us out with our discussion here, though, we're going to be using the website thefamouspeople.com, and we're going to look at some of their comments that they said about Robert Hansen, and I really thought that this one was done in a very, I mean, they really had the bullet points laid out so clearly. But in addition to being, born and raised in Iowa, Robert Hansen would go on to marry rather early in life. He had his first marriage in 1960, and then that one would end in divorce because Robert Hansen also developed a string of deviant behavior, and this was the time when he set fire to a Pocahontas County Board of Education school bus garage. This is also a very common feature of serial killers. They don't immediately jump into murder. I'm sure some do. In fact, I mean, I could even tell you perhaps some off the top of my head about people who have killed at a very early age. But what tends to happen is there is a very insecure force that is driving them. So the way that their deviant behavior takes shape is first they'll start with something, as we see here, maybe arson, but also smaller crimes like shoplifting. That probably happened much earlier on in Robert Christian Hansen's life. And then that would escalate into things like larger crimes, like burning down this school bus garage here, for example, or then maybe they're trying to steal larger items with a more significant value, and then eventually that will lead to murder. What's happening is the person is just doing more and more deviant behaviors because in the brain it fuels dopamine urges and it creates excitement. And in short, this person is committing these crimes to just have a stronger sensation, to have a stronger release of neurotransmitters, and they're showing absolutely no regard for the people that are affected by these things. And this becomes the foundation of the problematic issues associated with psychopathic and sociopathic behavior. A person is doing very destructive things, and they're showing no empathy or remorse for it. They do not care about how the other person is feeling or how these actions are going to be affecting other people, like burning down a school bus garage. Well, I mean, what are the consequences for other people? Doesn't matter. It fueled his own excitement and the release of neurotransmitters in his own brain. Who cares about what's going on in anybody else's brain? But another common feature on the hair checklist, which is used to determine psychopathy and sociopathy, is frequent marriages. And also you can see with many serial killers that they have marriages that are often very short, or that there's usually one person gets married to them at a young age and then they can't tolerate them anymore, so then they get away. And Robert Christian Hansen is a textbook example of that. And he is his this actually says here on the next bullet point that when he was in jail, his wife divorced him, and in the ensuing few years he was incarcerated multiple times for petty thefts. I mean, this stuff is all very textbook. And I think one of the reasons why Robert Christian Hansen was able to get away with all these crimes is because I was watching this documentary on YouTube from the channel Opfix Crime King. It's an uploaded one that they have that's it's definitely studio done. It's about an hour and 25 minutes, and they're playing these audio clips of Robert Christian Hansen, the serial killer, and his voice just sounds so gentle and he sounds so harmless. I'm reminded of a lot of the comments that I made during our episode on Herb Baumeister, who is the I-70 Strangler from Indiana, when we were saying that he was just once again creating this facade of gentleness and non-threatening behavior. He just comes across as so weak, for lack of a better term, that like there's no possible way that this person could ever hurt you. And he's using that as his ability to lure people close to him, creating this non-threatening facade, but in reality, he is very dangerous. And they talk about some other things here in the documentary and in this article about how Robert Christian Hansen was also a very scrawny teenager, and people would make fun of him for that as well, that he doesn't appear to be very muscular. Another serial killer that immediately comes to mind is Alexander Pichushkin, the chessboard killer, or the Bitsa Park maniac from Russia, because he was also bullied, mocked, teased, because he was a small, scrawny kid. So what his first immediate go-to was to develop a stronger physique, becoming obsessed with weightlifting. But with Robert Hansen, it seems like he definitely turned to deviant behavior. He is committing more and more crimes. And Dr. Todd Grande even talked about this in his psychological profile video of the Zodiac Killer, when he was saying that with serial killers, you really tend to see this. Like, there's almost always this record of small cases of arrest for things like shoplifting. And then you would want to wonder, like, how could somebody who grows up to become a serial killer have these very cold, methodical, and calculating acts when they can't even get away with shoplifting? They learn how to conceal their deviant behavior so people do not become very suspective of them. And let's go on to some other things, because there's a very valuable thing here. Because after Robert Christian Hansen gets married to his second wife, he moves to Alaska, and this is in 1967. This is a very pivotal time for the state of Alaska. I used to live in Anchorage, where Robert Christian Hansen was operating. And when I was watching that Fix Crime documentary that I mentioned, I think I can tell you where his bakery was located. When they're showing the photos of his bakery, Hansen's Bakery, I was like, I think I know where that location is. I mean, there's definitely some different places now. Certainly, he is no longer in business, but what I would say is that in Alaska at the time, you will just hear many stories about this coming to us from a variety of directions because people were going to Alaska in the 1960s because it was indeed a last frontier. You could enter the state and it had very lenient laws. They were very lax. The laws were not very strict there. And even Mike Gravel, the former presidential candidate, said that he moved to Alaska, and he was a Senator Mike Gravel from Alaska we're talking about, and he moved to Alaska because it was easier to be a real estate agent there, and you didn't have to go through the traditional means of obtaining a real estate license. And people are going to Alaska for a variety of reasons: easy money. They want to work in oil and logging and the crabfish boat. I mean, like becoming a crab fisherman, like Deadliest Catch or something like that. And you will meet people like this, even if you go to Anchorage to this day. I mean, people are coming off the oil rigs or they're coming off of the crab boats, and they just have these enormous wads of cash that they are, carrying around. And this also attracted many women into the profession of prostitution because they have lots of men who are in the logging camp or on the oil rig or on the crab boat for an extended period of time, and then when they're back in the city, then they want to spend enormous amounts of money on sex work. I mean, this really isn't rocket science. It's the oldest profession in the world, so they say. And then somebody like Robert Christian Hansen was all very much aware of this, and then his deviant behavior really began to expand in a very destructive way, and he started targeting sex workers. And the primary focus of his activities as a serial killer were the actions that he made against sex workers. And this could have a whole host of psychological reasons. Perhaps he was very bitter against people who rejected him when he was a teenager, and he just developed this very deep animosity toward women. But I mean, the growing Freudian in me tells me that there must have been some type of connection to his mother as well if he would develop these types of destructive tendencies. I mean, it definitely happened before his teen years, and the foundational principles. I mean, many people are rejected from society, and many people are deal with someone who is making fun of them for having a stutter or being scrawny or having acne. They don't go on to become serial killers. So I definitely would suspect that there is a very intense amount of separation between parents and children, the lack of bonding between parent and child between the ages of 0 and 4 years old. So, to look at some of the other crimes of Robert Hansen, in 1972 he was arrested for assault, and he was supposed to, he actually was sentenced to 6 months in prison for that. And in 1976 he was arrested for a failed attempt at stealing a chainsaw from a department store. Think about what we just said about doing things that are more deviant to fuel excitement. And I just have to tell you, the attempted theft of a chainsaw from a department store is stupid. I mean, if you're going to try and shoplift something, you're going to try and steal a chainsaw from a department store. No, I don't know all the specifics on that. That's just a very, it's just not the most normal thing that people would try to steal from a department store. And the next point is that he was also ordered to seek psychiatric treatment for his bipolar disorder. The Alaskan Supreme Court eventually ordered the sentence to be lessened to the time that he had already spent in jail during the trial. And this is another thing that seems to happen with some guys like Robert Christian Hansen. You'll see this time and time again with serial killers. They get free passes, they get slaps on the wrist, they always get these things like reduced sentence. And I think a lot of that really is attributed to the fact that people are just viewing them as, okay, well, this person is obviously not that evil. I mean, yes, okay, maybe they did something wrong, but they're not an evil person because they just appear so gentle, they just appear so soft-spoken. They become masters of disguise in other ways. But really, when we talked about Dennis Rader and BTK on this channel, we haven't done a specific upload about him. here we will do some things about BTK in the future. He really wanted to emphasize that it's not so much just about you're a master of disguise, where it's just, okay, this person is wearing a mask and then they have this true self behind it. Like, it's not two-dimensional. They're actually multi-dimensions, and BTK referred to it as cubing. Like, if you had like a pair of dice and you would roll them and there are 12 different possibilities, there are actually 12 different personas that this person can put on. When you're going to work, you need to act like a worker. When you're going to church, you need to act like a churchgoer, and Robert Hansen did all that as well. They even interviewed the pastor from his church in that Opix crime documentary. And but that's the whole point, that it's like, it's not just about the way that many people conceive of a serial killer is, okay, there's this evil person hiding behind the mask. In reality, it's like this person is playing many different roles. And then the concept of there's a concept called dramaturgy that has been incorporated into sociology, and it is named for William Shakespeare's play As You Like It. The whole thing about all the world's a stage and all the men are players, talking about how at different times you act like this and at different times you act like that. Serial killers appear to become masters of that because of this cubing method that BTK was just describing. You are, I mean, we shouldn't even say you, I was talking about the royal you. They are operating in a way in which they want to just play these different roles, and they're going to do it so normally and so casually because, the first reason could be sociopathic behavior and also just narcissistic tendencies. But when I say sociopathic behavior, they're just going to put on the facade of being a churchgoer or being a worker, and then people are going to be like, everything is totally normal, I don't feel threatened by this individual at all. And then when it's time to kill people, it's time to kill people, and they're going to be absolutely cold, heinous, and completely destructive. So a lot of it is done in a very logical, cold, methodical, and calculating way, because in the brain of a serial killer, there appears to be an irregularity in between the amygdala, which controls emotion, and the orbitofrontal cortex that is dealing with desire. And like, someone is like, has these desires to commit these very heinous acts, but they don't feel any of the emotional backlash that most people would. They're going to murder somebody and they aren't going to feel bad about the person that they're murdering. If anything, it's just going to be very exciting and exhilarating. And to talk about another serial killer from Russia, Andrei Chikatilo, the Butcher of Rostov, would say that he would even ejaculate when he is murdering people because of that excitement that we were just talking about. Now, if we go on here to some other things, I mean, we will talk more about the Zodiac Killer connections to Robert Christian Hansen in the later on in this episode, but I should just say it's important to note that he was moving to Alaska in 1967, and the first Zodiac Killer crime took place in 1968, December 20th, 1968, at Lake Herman Road. And we can also talk about how Robert Christian Hansen maybe would have a connection to Sherry Jo Bates. I mean, we're just laying out the theory and the ideas here, because there was a desktop poem that was found in, I want to say it was December of 66. Sherry Jo Bates was murdered on October 30th of 1966, and I think it was in December when a custodian found a poem that had been carved into a wooden desk that said, talking all about how she is the blood is spilled all over her dress, it doesn't matter, it was red anyway, something to that effect. I mean, perhaps you have read it. And it was signed with the initials R.H., and that was Robert Hansen, maybe same initials. Some people think that it is Richard Hoffman, and maybe it's Robert Graysmith Hal Snook or something like that, or perhaps it is just completely unconnected, because a very important thing to note about the desktop poem that was found after the murder of Sherry Jo Bates is it makes no mention of her personality or her name. There is no definitive connection to her there. And the other important thing to say is, I mean, she was indeed murdered outside of the RCC library where the desk was found. I mean, I believe that was a desk from the RCC library. She was murdered, not exactly on the premises, but again, an alleyway nearby. But is that enough to draw a connection between Robert Hansen and the murder of Sherry Jo Bates in Riverside, California? I'm not 100% sure. But the way that Robert Hansen is going to go on to become a Zodiac Killer suspect is, we can look at the very next point that is written on this website here, once again, thefamouspeople.com, called Murders and the Escape of Cindy Paulson. Cindy Paulson is going to be one of his more famous attempted victims. Robert Hansen would later admit that he had been abducting, raping, and killing women since 1971. He was arrested in 1983, and those and in those 12 years, he had attacked more than 30 women, raping and sexually assaulting them, and murdered a minimum of 17 women. And this is all taking place in Alaska. When it comes to any type of connection to the Zodiac Killer mystery, we would see that 1971, right? Well, then obviously that would mean that he would have just been operating as a serial killer in a different way, in perhaps somewhat of a more, almost a practicing sort of way, because a lot of people put this out there when they're going to be talking about their Zodiac Killer suspects. They believe that there was just a small time frame in the Zodiac Killer mystery in 1968 and 1969, with the final canonical crime ending on October 11th of 1969, because this person was mostly writing letters taking credit for murders because they were trying to practice at becoming a better serial killer. It's just like yes, it's about the thrill killing, but they're really just focusing on a way to expand their knowledge of how to kill people. And this is the first suspect that comes to mind that would fall into this similar category is Ted Kaczynski, a Zodiac theory that talks about someone committed the Zodiac Killer murders, and then they wanted to reshape and repackage their own type of serial killer MO and issue. And we will see throughout the duration of this recording that there are going to be many, many similarities between Ted Kaczynski and Robert Hansen in terms of how the Zodiac Killer narrative is going to be established. But if we can also just look at somebody like Robert Christian Hansen, based on the crimes that he did commit here, he is murdering very frequently. He is also committing these crimes mostly to satiate desires. Absolutely sexually driven, sexually motivated serial killer behavior that is going on here. But we will say more about that in just a second, and we will be back after this quick message. Bum ba bum 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 ba bum 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 ba bum bum bum. At this time, I would like to talk about some of the ways in which you can help Black Box Online Radio. This channel relies on your support, and the best way you can help out is just by listening to some more content. If you like what you hear, you can hit that like button, subscribe, and share with your friends on social media. But I should also say that Black Box Online Radio now has a Teespring page, and there will be some links in the description box. Please feel free to check out some of the merchandise that is available. Almost all sizes and colors are listed. So, you can also help out by going over to the Zodiac Killer channel and watching the documentary series Obsession into Darkness, parts 1, 2, and 3. I was one of the contributors for that, and you can see some other great Zodiac content on the Zodiac Killer channel. And yes, there will be a part 4 of Obsession into Darkness at some point in the future. And for now, let's get back to the show. When looking at the life of Robert Christian Hansen, I think it's important to share something that I was watching in the documentary Butcher Baker, Mind of a Monster, and they talked about when Robert Christian Hansen was 18, he went to the city of New York to visit, and it was there that he had his first sexual experience, and it was with a prostitute, a sex worker. But what was unique about this documentary was they had his own voice, like his own voiceover. There's no video of him saying this, but they're playing the audio clip, and he's talking about how he believed that it was too quick, too robotic almost, or just that it was very routine. She got on top of him, and then very quickly later on she got off of him. And he found that that was a very disappointing experience, because he said that if somebody was paying for it, then they should be the one in control, they should be the one calling the shots. And especially hearing that in his own words, he's giving you all of the windows into his psychology, and he's going on to become somebody who would murder prostitutes, and you can definitely see how experiences like that would shape somebody's identity. He wants to be in power, he wants to be in control, and he also feels very resentful to that woman whom he was with in New York. Probably for the rest of his entire life, he would remember that experience, thinking about how he wanted to have power over her, but he wasn't able to, so then he would act out the fantasy of dominating that woman by attacking other prostitutes. And I still have to insist, though, there is almost always going to be some type of connection to his mother in certain regards, most likely within the realm of, I guess you'd say, lack of bonding between mother and child, if he's going to have those types of feelings to begin with. Now, what I would like to do in this segment is first begin with something from explorenorth.com, and we're going to be looking at an article that was written by Murray Lundberg, Lundberg, Murray Lundberg. And let's just have a quick read, and let's talk about some of the material in here. To big game hunter Robert Hansen, Alaska was paradise, but for his victims, it was a terrifying wilderness and no one could hear their screams. The cover summary of Bernard Declos' book on Hansen called Fair Game is much more than just sensationalism. It's a pretty accurate summary of the period from 1971 to 1983 when Hansen stalked the sleazy parts of Anchorage looking for his victims. He is known to have killed at least 17 young women, although only 12 bodies were ever found. A recent television report, though, says that the number of victims was 37. And as we mentioned, that Hansen is going to go on to become a somewhat of an alternative suspect in the Zodiac Killer mystery, but it's also likely, according to this article here as well, that Hansen committed up to 30 rapes. But the thing that really jumped out at me from reading this is the next paragraph here. This case is significant for two reasons. It is the only known killing spree in which many of the women were apparently flown into the wilderness and then released and hunted down. It also set a legal precedent in 1983 when psychological profiling was used as the main basis for issuing search warrants on Hansen's property. Just sharing some things about the true crime world there. Once again, explorenorth.com and this article is written by Murray Lundberg on Robert Christian Hansen. Now, as far as it goes to talking about flying victims into the wilderness, if I can understand all the events as they've been put in place, Robert Hansen would allure sex workers into his car the same way that anybody would. I mean, he'd see somebody working on a street corner, he talks to them, and I heard that I think it was in the article. Oh, that's just escaped me. Excuse me. But he was talking about how he would offer $200 for oral sex, and they think, oh, maybe this guy's a high roller. He's saying he's going to pay them lots of money for something that would not require too much of their time, so they get into his car, and that Hansen would have a pair of handcuffs that was already in place. One cuff would be connected to some type of interior part of the car, an area in the console in between the driver's seat and the passenger seat, and then he would slap the cuff on the prostitute as soon as she entered the car. And Hansen said that he became so good at this that he could do it like an automatic reflex. So then she's handcuffed inside the car, and then he would drive her to the plane, and then she is incapacitated and left in this debilitating state while he flies her to an area, and then he would let her out, and he has his rifle. He preferred to use a Ruger Mini 14 rifle, but I think in the Mind of the Monster documentary they said that he also used a 223 M4, and then sometimes, and then he would release her pretty much, and then he would shoot her. That was one of the things that I found to be something that stood out to me as relatively new, because as I said, in early 2019, we did talk about Robert Christian Hansen as well. And I definitely remember that he murdered his victims. He murdered his victims with the Ruger Mini 14 rifle, and he also would dispose of the bodies after flying them to locations, burying them in the ground. But what I didn't remember is the concept of him releasing them and sort of setting it up like the most dangerous game and such. And I think that is not exactly an exaggeration, but the way that it appears that they laid it out in Mind of a Monster is that it's most likely just that he would he would pull the trigger and fire the gun very shortly after the woman was released. It's not like this elaborate hunt of cat and mouse game the way that one might immediately think about. Now, at this time, I would like to go over to the comments that were made by Kelly Gable on one of our recent uploads, and this was a request from myself, as saying that we were going to be doing this Robert Christian Hansen episode, and I wanted to talk about the connections between Robert Hansen and a possible Zodiac theory. So the first one that Kelly has written out here is that the Iowa Army Reserve Air National Guard logo has 3 stars and 3 eyes on top of a tree, and then there are 3 eyes on top of a tree on the Zodiac Halloween card. Iowa Department of Public Safety logo badge as well. Robert Hansen is Danish, and if you look up what Danish foods are, the Danish ate, you would see that they ate lots of salted pork, and the Zodiac talked about feeding salted pork to slaves. The eyes on the Halloween card spell out Iowa. Robert Christian Hansen, of course, was from Iowa. The one eye alone in the hole is I, and the hole itself is the O, and then below that there is a W, and that forms a capital A, making Iowa. So that the Zodiac was trying to tell us that he was from Iowa. Also on the Peek Through the Pines card, Sahara Club is placed to attach to a light pole. That makes it look like a lowercase r, and in the snow, if you look at the footprints and trails in the snow, they will make a capital H, R, and H, which appears to be Robert Hansen's initials. Robert Christian Hansen, of course, the butcher baker serial killer from Alaska. And I think that I think the bolder one that Kelly shared is something that we will put up here on the screen, and that is, last but not least, look up Full Circle Iowa City and look under photos. Does it look familiar? And of course, Full Circle Iowa City is an alternative Catholic church that I've learned about in Iowa City, and you can see their symbol here. Some other things to talk about Robert Christian Hansen and his connections to the Zodiac Killer mystery. We already said one, and that is that Robert Hansen hunted people for sport the same way that the Zodiac Killer talked about hunting people for sport. Man is the most dangerous animal of all. It's included in the solution to the 340 cipher. And the second one is the Zodiac Killer talked about murdering 37 people, and you just read that approximation from a TV report that this wasn't even addressed by name in Lundberg's article, that it's possible that Hansen murdered 37 people. The problem with that one is that the Zodiac said that he had already murdered those people in 1969 and 1970, and of course, Hansen's murder spree did not begin until 1971. Now, when I said that there are countless parallels and similarities between Robert Hansen and Ted Kaczynski, what that is about is that people were asking, well, if Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, was indeed the Zodiac Killer, why didn't he just confess to it? Forget about privileges, forget about any type of benefit to him, forget about getting a lighter sentence. Why not just say that you're the Zodiac Killer so people will interview you? And you hear this stuff about Kaczynski, you hear this about Robert Christian Hansen, and also about Bruce Davis, who is a member of the Manson family who becomes a Zodiac Killer suspect as well. Bruce Davis is still currently incarcerated, spending the rest of his life in prison. He does have the eligibility for parole, we should say, and he's been, I think he's been granted parole, but then the governor has overturned it. But I digress from that because what the simple response is just that the person who has confessed to the person who has been convicted of these murders does not want to confess because they really would just see that they have nothing to gain. They're never getting out of prison, and also it might actually cause other further legal complications. With Kaczynski, somebody even wrote into the show once saying that the reason why he would not confess to additional murders is he was just barely spared the death penalty. And with Robert Christian Hansen, he of course passed away in 2014, so there would be no way to extract any type of confession about the Zodiac Killer mystery. What we can say is Hansen moved to Alaska in 1967, and the first Zodiac Killer crime occurred in 1968. He would have had to have been flying down to the San Francisco Bay Area, and Kelly Gable once wrote in saying that, well, Robert Christian Hansen was a pilot, and the Zodiac Killer talked about airplane cement, and I was even following that for a time being, but somebody wrote into the comments section and said that the airplane cement the Zodiac Killer was talking about is for model airplanes. It's like the glue that holds a model airplane together, and the Zodiac's reference to that was when the Zodiac said that he did not leave any fingerprints behind because he puts 2 coats of airplane cement on his fingertips so that wouldn't leave any fingerprints. And believe it or not, I mean, I would actually like to test that out to see how well that actually works, but that there might be some truth to that based on how methodical and calculating the Zodiac Killer was. Whereas with Robert Christian Hansen, you can see these sexual escalations are going up much more intensely, or that it's all sexually motivated, and it's all done in a way in which he is definitely just trying to get his rocks off with a girl, but the Zodiac said very clearly that he was more about the killing. And that's the thing, though, that I think is a big differentiation between Robert Christian Hansen and the Zodiac Killer. With Hansen, the sexual angle is much larger and much more present. I think the only way that that theory would have any validity would be just that it would be the escalation of deviant crime going on in life. As we said, Hansen burned down the bus garage, which was referred to as the bus barn in Iowa. And I have a big thing to say about that one in just a second, but also that Hansen was involved with stealing. He stole the chainsaw, as well as countless other crimes like assault. So he had this very big, growing criminal record. And is it possible that somebody, and even if no matter what Zodiac killer suspect you're thinking about, that someone was using the Zodiac killer murders as what I call the primer? And I even thought about doing an upload called Zodiac Primer Theory, but I didn't think anybody would figure out what I was talking about from that title. But just to talk about the entire idea that that was viewed as the practicing of committing the murders. But the next thing that I would want to share in regards to that bus garage fire that we can go back to that subject, because a reason why Hansen orchestrated that, and I learned about this from the Lundberg article, was he got together with a 16-year-old individual, and they burned down the bus garage, which was known as the bus barn, because Hansen viewed it as a symbol of the school days in which he had a terrible and miserable experience. And that 16-year-old individual actually just felt guilty, and he came forward and he confessed to it and told him that Robert Christian Hansen was the person who was involved with that. And in the Mind of the Monster documentary, they mentioned that Hansen was from Pocahontas, Iowa, as we say, or he's living in Pocahontas, Iowa, which is a small town, and word travels very fast. And people, they know who Robert Hansen is. They know that his father runs the bakery, which Robert Hansen also worked in. They know about this family business, so then the rumor really began to spread, and his parents were actually very embarrassed and humiliated over that. Hansen was sentenced to 3 months, but he only did, what was it, what did we say, 20 months of the, 3 months, no, excuse me, 3 years, and he did 20 months of that sentence, and then he's released, but his parents sold the bakery out of humiliation, as well, and I think that that is its own type of rejection, that his deviant behavior really bothered his parents, and then they just rejected him even more, and this caused a larger separation when Hansen decided to move to Alaska. A big reason for that is the parents left the area entirely. They were embarrassed because of Robert Hansen's actions. They sold the bakery, and then they moved to Minnesota, purchasing what has been described as a resort. So this separation between parent and child is very valuable. I mean, like, it's very, having a good relationship between parent and child is very valuable, and that separation can be very devastating. And I think even as in Robert Hansen's late teen years, I'm sure that that would have affected him in a certain way, especially for the fact that already I'm seeing signs of not having a strong relationship with his mother, as well as not having a strong relationship with the good experiences with his father. They're saying his father was very strict, very big on punishment, and those types of negative experiences perhaps affected Hansen in a way in which he began to take out his frustrations in the form of destructive fantasies. And he also felt that the experience that he had when he was 18 was something in which was very detrimental to his well-being, or he felt that he was the victim in all of these things, whether it's, dealing with the harsh punishments from his father, not bonding with his mother, or that the sex worker isn't giving him what he wanted. He felt like he was the victim, and this goes into a host of other issues like sense of entitlement disorder and such, but that's almost unfair to speculate about at the time, because I think what's much more valuable is looking at how the all of these pieces just come together, and this person wants to be a serial killer who's targeting prostitutes, and it's also the logical factor that's going in, and people really wanted to emphasize this because they were saying that Hansen was targeting these women because they were in vulnerable places, because many of them were not connected to their families, or that the police may not think too highly of the women that are disappearing. And it's always possible that someone who doesn't really have a lot of strong roots connected to the Alaskan area could just move on to another city. And when many of these people disappeared, they're like, well, I mean, maybe they moved on to a different part of the country. Maybe they moved, from Anchorage to Fairbanks or something, or perhaps they went back to the lower 48 states. I mean, people weren't necessarily keeping tabs on all of these individuals all the time. Or if somebody disappeared, then we didn't have social media or any type of internet at the time, so people wouldn't really be keeping tabs on someone in the exact same way. And I think that's a point that does need re-emphasizing from time to time. Kelly Gable has also shared something with me, though, about Robert Christian Hansen and his connections to the Zodiac Killer mystery. And originally I thought that when Kelly wrote this out, that it was, look at Robert Christian Hansen's house, and will you see something that reminds you of the zodiac symbol? And I did, but I didn't see anything there. Then Kelly corrected me and saying, no, not the house, it's the map. And what I was advised to was to Google Robert Hansen's map, and I did, and you can see that in the graphic now. And with Robert Hansen's map, the thing that I'm reminded of is not only the zodiac symbol, of course, with the circles and such, and this is actually an aviation map that was used to locate many of Hansen's buried victims. It's that this reminds me of the zodiac symbol with that has been placed on top of Mount Diablo. If you put the zodiac symbol on top of Mount Diablo, the way the zodiac suggested, also by using and by putting a radian on top of Mount Diablo with the zodiac symbol, you'll find that one arm of the radian, an angle at 57.29 degrees, goes to Blue Rock Springs, and one line of the radian goes to Presidio Heights, two incidents in Zodiac activity where Darlene Ferrin was murdered and where Paul Stein was murdered. Another thing that YouTube user Jamie Hendrickson shared with me is that pilots and sailors use radians, not only mathematicians and architects and such, the way that Gareth Penn would lay out, but also pilots and sailors. Robert Hansen was indeed a pilot. But I do confess that it does show somewhat of a striking similarity about how the Zodiac would have at least had some type of similar thought process going on. That number 37 really did stand out to me when I was reading that in the Lundberg article. I mean, obviously, I'm not convinced that Robert Christian Hansen was the Zodiac killer. Instead, I think that he is rather a textbook case of serial killer psychology, and just looking how all of these elements fall in together, it really is textbook, and this is going to happen. Alienation plus poor relationships with parents plus sexual frustration, rejection from society, all of these elements come together, as well as the escalating deviance that he would have experienced in his youth and teen years, and people are just turning a blind eye to it all the time. They're ignoring it. They're just not paying attention to it, and they are not following along with any of the problems that Hansen is committing, once again, because they think that he is just so gentle and harmless that he deserves a pass, or that maybe they even feel guilty about punishing somebody who's appearing to be so gentle and harmless. So with Hansen and his entire setup, it really appears that he could deceive people. He was an expert in deception, and he fooled people for years. They just thought that he was what? Bob the Baker. That's who he was, Bob the Baker, and that's why he became known as Alaska's serial killer, the Butcher Baker. However, one point that I should share about Robert Christian Hansen is not all of his victims have been identified. There were at least two people that stood out to me very clearly, on Hansen's body count list when I read it the first time, that there were two unidentified female victims that were murdered by him. And I was thinking about doing either an upload or a series of uploads on, who were these people. Maybe there's some clues that people have shared. I mean, I'm not in Anchorage anymore, so I wouldn't be able to do any type of first-hand investigation. But I was definitely thinking about doing that in the past, but then I thought that that would be not only it would just be very difficult to present that in any way that, in terms of broadcasting, in which you would actually be able to reach anybody. I mean, maybe if the channel gets a little bit bigger, and because you'd be talking about unknown individuals, as well as it's not a missing persons case. It's more like trying to identify a murdered Jane Doe, and I really do not do too much with that here on this channel. But in conclusion, I would also just like to say we can keep an open mind to many Zodiac killer theories, and we can also look at a lot of the clues and symbols that people are sharing and putting out. But another point, though, that I should say about the map that was shared from Robert Christian Hansen, and that is that it also reminds me of the Red Rider comic symbol, because they believe that the reason why they have the Red Rider symbol with two dots on it on the Halloween card is you're supposed to put that on a map, and it's going to draw some lines and connections, and it might reveal some information about the Zodiac killer. That is just the last thing that I would like to put in there. But what do you have to say about Robert Christian Hansen? What do you have to say about anything to do with the Zodiac Killer? And what do you have to say about anything in regards to serial killers? Please drop your ideas in the comment section below, as well as asking any questions about future discussions. Please just share anything you would like in the comment section below. That's all for me now. See you on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And thank you to Kelly for all the stuff that was shared. Until next time.